last week I was in rough shape, you know? I mean, last week I bought a Whirlpool for my bath. So far, I lost 3 of my best ships. Last week, nothing went right. I bought a waterbed. There were 2 Cuban guys swimming in it looking for Florida. I tell you, people are nuts, you know? My dentist, too, another beauty, my dentist, he found a new way to hide his bad breath. He holds up his arms. I tell you, I mean, there's wise guys. Well, I checked in a hotel. I asked the bellhop to handle my bag. He started to feel up my wife. I said to him, I said, hey, buddy, who told you could play around with my wife? He said, everybody. I told my wife I could never relax, you know. I told her our kid is spoiled. She told me a lot of kids smell that way. She's a lousy cook, too. She can't cook at all. I leave dental floss in the kitchen, the roaches hang themselves. My wife, she don't go for me either. I'm not a good-looking guy. Well, Halloween, I open the front door, kids give me candy. Are you kidding? I know I'm ugly. My dog found out we look alike. He killed himself. And I was an ugly kid, too. My old man took me to the zoo. The guy at the gate thanked him for returning me. And I was a very ugly kid. Every time my old man wanted sex, my mother showed him my picture.
Good morning. It's Friday, April the 21st, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the Star-Spangled Banner, we will have No Free Lunch, Marco Rubio, Stuart Varney, The Rape of the Mind, The Revolt of the Elites. All that and more when I come back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing and remove your hats for the national anthem of the United States of America.
Thank you. And now there's no free lunch. 250 Economic Truths by David-Bahnsen.
Once the principle is admitted that it is the duty of the government to protect the individual against his own foolishness, no serious objections could be advanced against further encroachments. Ludwig von Mises. We refer to this as the problem of the lack of limiting principle. Opening the door to the government as the defender of the individual against themselves lacks any sort of coherent limiting principle and has been shown to lead to great folly in public policy. Not only does this view of the citizen and the state excessively empower the state, it infantilizes the citizen, the worst sin of the two.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David-Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. So this is Stuart Varney. There's a little clip here that involves Senator Marco Rubio, and I want you to hear what he has to say.
So it honestly feels like every day it's an avalanche of news. And it's one of the things that frustrates me is when I hear people say, oh, you guys are being hyperbolic or you're exaggerating or it's a red scare or you're doing this for political purposes. We better wake up because the challenge is much bigger than our commitment right now, unfortunately.
And so now what he's saying here again is basically nobody's listening. Of course nobody's listening. Republicans have shot their wad. The Republicans, and I've said this before, that the Republicans, nobody takes them seriously. Nobody responds when they put out the call and says, oh, things are going to be terrible, horrible, and awful if we don't do something soon, right? Because nothing bad ever happens. The Republicans have predicted exactly 0 of the last 100 disasters. Okay, every day they're out saying, well, we better stop this or something terrible is going to happen, but nothing terrible happens. Now, it may very well be because the Democrats are rather good at hiding the disasters so that they're not very evident. But whatever the reason, Republicans then go out and make a prediction. This is the reason you don't make predictions, because if the predictions don't come true, you end up looking like a jackass. You end up being Chicken Little. The sky is falling, but nobody wants to listen. Okay, and so that's what he's complaining about here. Nobody's listening. Well, too bad. You guys are the ones that are stupid enough to follow the lead of the left and make predictions. If instead of making predictions, you make value statements, you make moral statements, you say what should happen or what shouldn't happen and why, now you're getting somewhere. Now you can restore your integrity and your credibility, and people will listen to you. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now a little bit of Stuart Varney on a segment called My Take.
President Biden will announce his re-election bid next Tuesday. A big bash is planned, complete with mega donors and a polished videotape. It is going to happen. He is going to run. So when I said I thought that he would not run because the Democrats won't let him, I was wrong. They are letting him run. But where's the enthusiasm? I don't see the Democrats joyously celebrating. In fact, poll after poll shows most Democrats don't want him to run. In New Hampshire, only 25% want him as their first choice. I don't think he has the energy for a second term. Sure, he will repeat the basement strategy, avoiding serious questions. But in a presidential campaign, it's very hard to stay permanently on prompter. The voters know when you're hiding. I don't think his policies measure up either for a second term. Energy, immigration, spending, taxes, all green all the time. That's not what the country wants or needs. This man's out of touch. But his biggest problem is his age. To put it bluntly, a forgetful, tired, 80-year-old guy is in no position to mount a strenuous campaign. At 82, he would be in no condition to start another 4-year term. And all the time, Vice President Harris looms in the background. The Democrats are terrified that our aging president could be incapacitated, and the party has to run with President Harris. Okay, so I was wrong about him not running, but I'm right about the Democrats not wanting him. They're stuck, and there's now no graceful way for them to get out.
So anyways, he is, the problem with this is that, again, it's more of a prediction kind of thing. He's talking about, okay, his prediction failed, right? So he comes out, he makes his prediction, and it didn't happen. Joe Biden goes ahead and runs anyhow. So that makes him look bad, because the next time he makes a prediction, why should anybody listen to him? Because right now he's 0 for 1. So what he should have done was say whether or not Joe Biden should run. Does Joe Biden deserve another 4 years in office? Now, he answers that question inadvertently at the very last of his analysis when he says, finally, he's too old. And that's wrong. His age isn't the issue. Health is the issue. That's the strategy that Republicans need to take, that the president is not healthy. He's not healthy enough for a re-election campaign, and he's definitely not healthy enough for another 4 years in the White House. We should be saying that we pity President Biden. We feel sorry for him because here he is, 80 years old. He should be bouncing his grandchildren on his knee, but he's forced to endure the rigors of a presidential campaign, and he's forced to then, if he wins, do another 4 years as president. And in that 4 years, not only is it going to be taxing his health, but he doesn't look good in the process. He ends up making a fool out of himself and, by extension, the United States of America. So, no, he does not deserve another 4 years, and he should not run. That's what Mr. Varney should say. He says, and then at the very end, of course, I was wrong about this, but I was right that the Democrats don't want him. No, you weren't even right about that, because he's misrepresenting a statistic. And that is the poll that says he claims in which 25% want 25% of Democrats all over the country want Joe Biden versus everybody else he might be up against. And no, it is 25% of those surveyed. Again, they take a survey of 1,000 or 2,000 people. There might be tens of millions of Democrat voters, which there is. There's got to be tens of millions, because we had, 70 million and 80 million in the 2020 election. So there's tens of millions of Democrat voters, and 1,000 people being surveyed is not a representative sampling. So what he should have done is say, of those surveyed, he needs, and all Republicans need, to quit misrepresenting statistics. The Republicans have too much of a tendency to have this kind of an attitude of, if it's good enough for the Democrats, it's good enough for us, because the Democrats were the ones that started warping surveys and polls to their own political benefit. Shame on the Republicans for doing the same thing. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, a little bit more of Chapter 1 of The Revolt of the Elites by Christopher-Lasch.
Theirs is essentially a tourist's view of the world, not a perspective likely to encourage a passionate devotion to democracy. In The True and Only Heaven, I try to recover a tradition of democratic thought, call it populist for lack of a better term, that has fallen into disuse. One reviewer surprised me by complaining that the book had nothing to say about democracy, a misunderstanding I have laid to rest, I trust, in Chapter 4, Does Democracy Deserve to Survive? That he could miss the point of the book in this way tells us something about the current cultural climate. It shows how confused we are about the meaning of democracy, how far we have strayed from the premises on which this country was founded. The word has come to serve simply as a description of the therapeutic state. When we speak of democracy today, we refer more often than not to the democratization of self-esteem. The current catchwords, diversity, compassion, empowerment, entitlement, express the wistful hope that deep divisions in American society can be bridged by goodwill and sanitized speech. We are called on to recognize that all minorities are entitled to respect, not by virtue of their achievements, but by virtue of their sufferings in the past. Compassionate attention, we are told, will somehow raise their opinion of themselves. Banning racial epithets and other forms of hateful speech will do wonders for their morale. In our preoccupation with words, we have lost sight of the tough realities that cannot be softened simply by flattering people's self-image. What does it profit the residents of the South Bronx to enforce speech codes at elite universities? In the first half of the 19th century, most people who gave any thought to the matter assumed that democracy had to rest on a broad distribution of property. They understood that extremes of wealth and poverty would be fatal to the democratic experiment. Their fear of the mob, sometimes misinterpreted as aristocratic disdain, rested on the observation that a degraded laboring class, at once servile and resentful, lacked the qualities of mind and character essential to democratic citizenship. Democratic habits, they thought, self-reliance, responsibility, initiative, were best acquired in the exercise of a trade or the management of a small holding of property. A competence, as they called it, referred both to property itself and to the intelligence and enterprise required by its management. It stood to reason, therefore, that democracy worked best when property was distributed as widely as possible among the citizens. The point can be stated more broadly. Democracy works best when men and women do things for themselves with the help of their friends and neighbors instead of depending on the state. Not that democracy should be equated with rugged individualism. Self-reliance does not mean self-sufficiency. Self-governing communities, not individuals, are the basic units of democratic society, as I argue in Chapter 5, Populism or Communitarianism, 6, Conversation and the Civic Arts, and 7, Racial Politics in New York. It is the decline of those communities, more than anything else, that calls the future of democracy into question. Suburban shopping malls are no substitute for neighborhoods. The same pattern of development has been repeated in one city after another with the same discouraging results. The flight of population to the suburbs, followed by the flight of industry and jobs, has left our cities destitute. As the tax base shrivels, public services and civic amenities disappear. Attempts to revive the city by constructing convention centers and sports facilities designed to attract tourists merely heighten the contrast between wealth and poverty. The city becomes a bazaar, but the luxuries on display in its exclusive boutiques, hotels, and restaurants are beyond the reach of most of the residents. Some of those residents turn to crime as the only access to the glittering world seductively advertised as the American dream. Those with more modest aspirations, meanwhile, are squeezed out by high rents, gentrification, and misguided policies intended to break up ethnic neighborhoods that allegedly stand in the way of racial integration.
And that was part 2 of Chapter 1 of The Revolt of the Elites and the Betrayal of Democracy. And he's getting a little bit, or perhaps since he's talking about the early elites, and they're talking about distributing income. They figured that the distribution of income had to occur, otherwise democracy wasn't going to succeed, and yet that's wrong. It's just as long as everybody has the opportunities to succeed, then that's good enough. You don't have to go out and redistribute all the income. He's also a little bit deterministic here when he's talking about the fear that people that are poor are going to automatically turn to crime. They're going to be forced to turn to crime by, I guess poverty. And that's been a trope of the left for decades, that the reason we have crime is because criminals are just simply poor people that have been forced to turn to crime in order to get ahead. And it's just not true. We've seen plenty of people that have, another example is these days illegal aliens. How many of the people that you're seeing that live on the street in, say, Los Angeles are illegal aliens? Not very many. Not very many. the vast majority of the illegal aliens are working. They may not be making a whole lot of money, but they are working. So, and as long as they work and they put and be a little bit smart about things, they can enjoy the same fruits of their labor as anyone else. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the rape of the mind.
The womb state. Totalitarianism is man's escape from the fearful realities of life into the virtual womb of the leader. The individual's actions are directed from this womb, from the inner sanctum. The mystic center is in control of everything. Man need no longer assume responsibility for his own life. The order and logic of the prenatal world reign. There is peace and silence, the peace of utter submission. The members of the womb state do not really communicate. Between them, there is silence. The silence of possible betrayal, not the mature silence of reticence and reservedness. Totalitaria increases the gap between the things one shows and communicates and the things one secretly dreams and thinks deep within oneself. It develops the artificial split-mindedness of political science. Whatever little remains of individual feeling and opinion is kept carefully enclosed. In the schizophrenic world of totalitaria, there is no free mutual exchange, no conversation, no exclamation, no release from emotional tension. It is a world of silent conspirators. Indeed, the atmosphere of suspicion is the big attacker of mental freedom because it makes people cling together, conspiring against mysterious enemies, first from the outside, then among themselves. In totalitaria, each citizen is continually watched. The mythical state molds the individual's conscience. He has hardly any of his own. His neighbors watch him, his postmen, his children, and they all represent the punishing state, just as he himself must represent the state and watch others. Not betraying them is a crime. The need to find conspiracies, to discover persecutors and criminals, is another schizophrenic manifestation. It is psychologically related to an infantile need for a feeling of omnipotence. Megalomaniac feelings grow better in an atmosphere of mysterious secrecy. Secrecy and conspiracy increase the delusion of power. That is why so many people like to pry into other people's lives and to play the spy. This feeling of conspiracy also lies behind the pathological struggle with our imaginary persecutors, a struggle we find both in mentally ill individuals and in our own mythical totalitaria. It is there. It is chasing us. All the inner fears of losing the nirvanic womb illusion become rampant. Mysterious ghosts and vultures chase people out of nirvana and paradise. In these fantasies, the patriarch, the dictator, the idol becomes both the universal danger and the omnipotent savior at the same time. Not even the citizens of totalitaria really love this cruel giant. Suspicion against the breast that feeds and the hand that guides and forbids is often found in the fantasy of schizophrenic children who experience the nourisher as the enemy, the dominating ogre, bribing the growing mind into submission. The deep hate the sick individual feels toward the parental figure cannot be expressed directly, and so it is displaced onto the self or onto scapegoats. Scapegoatism is part of the totalitarian strategy. As we pointed out before, the scapegoat temporarily absorbs all the individual's inner fury and rage. Kulaks, Negroes, Jews, communists, capitalists, profiteers, and warmongers. Any or all of them can play that role. Perhaps the greatest dangers to the totalitarian mind is the use of intellect and awareness as the eggheads demand for free, verifying thinking. Aberration and perversion are chosen by the citizens of totalitaria, as they are by the inhabitants of madhouses, over tiring intellectual control. In the center of the totalitarian fears and fantasies stands the man-eating god and idol. He is unconquerable. He uses man's great gift of adjustment to bring him to slavery. Every man's inner core of feeling and thoughts has to belong to the leader. Is the citizen of totalitaria consciously aware of this? Probably not. Modern psychology has taught us how strongly the mental mechanism of denial and reality works. The eye bypasses external occurrences when the mind does not want them to happen. Secondary justifications and fantasies are formed to support and explain these denials. In totalitaria, we find the same despising of reality facts as we do in schizophrenia. How else are we to explain the fact that Hitler was still moving his armies on paper after they were already defeated? Totalitarian strategy covers inner chaos and conflict by the strict order of the police state. So does the compulsive schizophrenic patient, by his inner routine and schedules. These routines and schedules are a defense against painful occurrences in external reality. This internal robotization may lead to denial of internal realities and internal needs as well. The citizen of totalitaria, repressing and rejecting his inner need for freedom, may even experience slavery as liberation. He may even go one step further, yearn for an escape from life itself, a delusion that he could become omnipotent through utter destruction. The SS soldiers called this the magic action of the Blutkit, the tie of bloody crime binding them together and preparing them for Valhalla. With this magic unification, they could die with the courage and equanimity. Anarchic despair and need for greatness alternated in them as they do in the psychotic patient. In the same way, the citizens of totalitaria search for a heroic place in history, even though the price be doom and annihilation. Many soldiers, tired by the rigidness of normal life, look back at violent moments of the war experiences, despite the hunger and terror, as monumental culminating experiences of their lives. There, in the Brunderbund of fighters, they felt happy for the first time and only times in their lives. Dicks. This all sounds like a bitter comedy, but the fantasy of schizophrenics has taught us how the mind can retreat into delusion when there is fear of daily existence. Under these circumstances, fantasy begins to prevail over reality and soon assumes a validity which reality never had. The totalitarian mind is like the schizophrenic mind. It has a contempt for reality. Think for a moment of Lysenko's theory and its denial of the influence of heredity. The totalitarian mind does not observe and verify its impressions of reality. It dictates to reality how it shall behave. It compels reality to conform to its fantasies. The comparison between totalitarianism and psychosis is not incidental. Delusional thinking inevitably creeps into every form of tyranny and despotism. Unconscious backward forces come to action. Evil powers from the archaic past return. An automatic compulsion to go on to self-destruction develops, to justify one mistake with a new one. To enlarge and expand the vicious pathological circle becomes the dominating end of life. The frightened man, burdened by a culture he does not understand, retreats into the brute fantasy of limitless power in order to cover up the vacuum inside himself. This fantasy starts with the leaders and is later taken over by the masses they oppress. What else can man do when he is caught in that treacherous machine called totalitaria? Thinking, and the brain itself, has become superfluous. That is, only reserved for the elite. Man has to renounce his uniqueness, his individual personality, and must surrender to the equalizing and homogenizing patterns of so-called integration and standardization. This arouses in him the great inner emptiness of the savage child, the emptiness of the robot that unwittingly yearns for the great destruction. Chapter 7. The intrusion by totalitarian thinking. In order to investigate the social forces at work undermining the free individual development of man's mind, we have to look at manifold aspects of political life. As a clinician and polypragmatist, I don't want to bind myself to one political state or current, but want to describe what can be experienced in social life everywhere. Where human thinking and human habits are in the process of being remolded, they are under the influence of tremendous political upheaval. In one country, this may happen overnight. In others, more slowly. The psychologist's task is to observe and describe the impact of these processes on the human mind. When once a nation is under the yoke of totalitarianism, when once its people have succumbed to the oversimplifications and blandishments of the would-be dictator, how does the leader maintain his power? What technique does he use to make his countrymen docile followers of his bloody regime? Because man's mature self resists totalitarianism, The dictator must work and scheme constantly to keep his subjects in line and to immobilize their need for individual development, rebellion, and healthy growth. As we examine his techniques, we will come to a better understanding of totalitarianism and its interaction between the dictator's methods and the personalities of his subjects. We need this understanding desperately, for we have to recognize that the forces in totalitaria that make humorless robots out of living men can also develop, albeit unwittingly, in the so-called free democratic.
And that was The Rape of the Mind, and it was the end part here is Chapter 7, The Intrusion of Totalitarian Thinking. And again, he's talking about totalitarianism. It's an imaginary place that has a totalitarian government. And so he's trying to describe what's going on in that place, particularly psychologically. So, and that's, again, The Rape of the Mind by Joost-meerlo.
Lord Rush Limbaugh's on by the Rush Hawkins Singers is exactly what's called for. Rush Limbaugh's on.
This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. So I'm reminding you that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.